Hi, today we wanted to talk about swap. So this would be the slide number 27. That's the slide we want to start with. So swap is just like a forward or future and option. They are all very useful financial security, allow us to hedge a lot of the foreign exchange risk. The main difference between swap is the swap is a contract that has a much longer life compared with the other financial instrument. The other financial instrument, usually they have a maturity no longer than 1 year. While swap, we can construct a swap for 5 years, 10 years, or even longer. And there are two major types of swap that we are using. The first one is the interest rate swap, and the second type of the swap is so-called currency swap. Next slide. The swap market is a very big one, okay? And the notional principle of the swap for interest rate swap is about 400 trillion US dollar, so that's a lot of money. And the currency swap is about 1/10 of the size of interest rate swap, and is about 30 trillion US dollar. And the most popular denominating currency for the swap is US dollar, Japanese yen, euro, Swiss francs, and British pound. Okay, next slide. Swap Bank. Swap Bank is a financial institution that arranged, or they play the role of either a dealer or a broker for swap this type of contract. Broker means that the bank does not take out inventory and simply try to become a broker for the counterparty of the swap to bring them together. That would be the broker. And the swap bank can also play the role of a dealer. That means that they stand by at any given time and providing the quotes that would be bid and ask to engage in the swap with any customer of theirs. So the swap bank can actively manage a market, make a market, or simply just play the role of trying to bring two counterparties together. Next slide. And the swap bank can tailor the terms of the interest rate and currency swap to customer need, in the sense that, for example, the period of the contract. It could be not just 5 years or 10 years, it could be 6 years, 7 years, and 8 years. So it's highly tailor-made kind of contract, okay? And there are also a huge market for the so-called plain vanilla, rather generic standardized swap. And this is a kind of swap that the swap bank would continuously update their bid and ask on their portal, such that the user or the customer of the swap would be able to look into their quotes continuously. Okay, so the plain vanilla swap is very active market. And let's take a look at such example. The generic fixed for floating swap. So this is one type of interest rate swap. And so we allow for two different kinds of cash flow to be exchanged between the user. Let's assume that would be you, okay, your company, and then the swap bank. And this kind of swap, one is the interest expenditure based on fixed rate interest rate, while the other would based on the floating interest rate. And that's why we refer to the fixed and floating swap. And it could be that from you, let's assume this is you, this is the bank. It may be that you provide the cash flow that is the floating payment, and you receive fixed payment, or vice versa, that you pay fixed interest payment while receiving floating interest payment. It could be either way, depends on your need. Okay, and let's consider a 5-year swap with semi-annual payment 8.5% to 8.6% against 6-month dollar LIBOR rate. Let's stop here. Let's look into one term at a time. So this is a swap with a length of 5 years. So this contract is going to last for 5 years. Semi-annual payment, that means that every 6 months there will be some cash flow to be exchanged between you and the swap bank. And what kind of payment? The fixed interest rate is 8.5% to 8.6%. It really depends on whether you receive fixed payment or whether you pay the fixed payment. When you receive fixed payment, you only get 8.5%. Okay? When you pay fixed payment, you will need to pay 8.6%. And this difference of 0.1% is a revenue to swap bank, very much like the interest. When you save your money in the bank, you are not going to get a very high interest rate. When you borrow money from the bank, you are going to pay a relatively high interest rate. And that spread, that margin, is a revenue to a typical commercial bank when we save money or when we borrow money. Here, same idea. When we involve in swap with a swap bank, okay, we can only get 8.5% fixed rate payment while we only pay 8.6% fixed payment. Okay, and the difference is the revenue to the bank. And here, this fixed payment would be against 6-month dollar LIBOR rate. And 6 months, that means that the interest of the LIBOR is we borrow 6 months and then we borrow it another 6 months and borrow it another 6 months. And then over 1 year's period, in other words that we borrow it twice because each time we borrow 6 months. If within 1 year, what would be that interest rate? That when one very reputable bank borrow from another very reputable bank in London, in the city of London. That's what we refer to 6-month dollar LIBOR rate. LIBOR interest rate is interest rate for one reputable bank like Goldman Sachs borrow money from Barclays, for example, another very reputable bank in the city of London. And this kind of borrowing will, for each contract, last for 6 months. If you do that twice within a year, then what amount of annual interest rate that you will need to pay? And that is what we refer to 6-month dollar LIBOR rate. Okay, and so this is the numerical example that I want to show you here. Okay, we have a relatively low-tech solution, but this will work. And let's assume that we have a contract. Okay, and a contract is going to have a so-called notional principal. In this case, that assume that is 100 million US dollar. Okay, so this contract has a notional principal of $100 million. This doesn't mean that we do the exchange of $100 million. No, the kind of cash flow that we do the exchange would be the interest rate on this principal. So let's look at the ask. We were dealing with the fixed payment 8.5 to 8.6%, right? Okay, so the 8.6%. So here, that would be this one, the ask. Let me use this one. So the ask of 8.6%, okay, it would mean that every 6 months there is a fixed payment 8.6% divided by 2, because now we will need to do this twice over a year. So each time we actually only get 4.3% times the principal of $100 million. And as you can see that here we're talking about $4.3 million. Okay, and because this is based on ask, so let's look at the cash flow direction. This means that you, the user, okay, will need to pay 4.3, that's a fixed dollar amount, $4.3 million to the swap bank every 6 months. This kind of cash flow that you need to pay will be every 6 months, $4.3 million. In return, you are going to receive the floating interest payment based on 6-month LIBOR rate. Let's look at this computation. Okay, so here, let's assume that the LIBOR interest rate, let's assume that turn out to be 9%. If the LIBOR interest rate is 9%, okay, at the end of the first 6 months, then what kind of cash flow we're talking about here for floating one? It would be 9% divided by 2 times $100 million. So it would be 4.5%. So that would be this dollar amount. Let me put it. That would be 4.5% you are going to receive. So you pay 4.3% to the swap bank. You receive $4.5 million interest payment based on 6-month LIBOR from the swap bank. If 6 months later the LIBOR interest rate is 9%, okay? Let's assume a different scenario because this is a floating rate. Interest rate could be 9%, could be anything. Let's assume that it turned out to be the 8%, that would be the red color. If the LIBOR in 6 months turned out to be the 8%, then what happened? Okay, to the floating payment that we receive, as you can see that this 9%, okay, we would need to put into 8%, and that is going to give us $4 million, and that's a red color here, $4 million. So we are going to only receive $4 million. So when it's 9% LIBOR, we'll receive $4.5 million. When it's 8%, we only receive $4 million. So this is floating. So we have a fixed payment of $4.3 million, but the amount of money we're going to receive in 6 months would be involving some degree of uncertainty based on whether the LIBOR interest rate is high or whether the LIBOR interest rate is low. Okay, so this is one pass. This when you deal with the S price, then this would be the cash flow that pattern that will look like. On the other hand, within this little square box, what if we desire a fixed payment inflow? What if we wanted to receive a fixed payment? What amount of fixed payment will we be able to receive? We'll be able to receive 4.25% because we're talking about 8.5% bid price. Okay, bid price is 8.5% divided by 2, 4.25% times $100 million. So we are going to receive 4.25%, not 4.3%. Okay, and we can only get 8.5% when we receive the money. And our payment is going to be floating. Depends on the LIBOR rate. So we just divide the LIBOR rate by 2 times $100 million. That will be the amount of money each 6 months that we're going to pay to the swap bank. Of course, LIBOR change every second. Okay, so every time this payment will be different. Every 6 months our payment will be different, but we always receive a fixed amount of $4.25 million every 6 months for 5 years. So this contract is going to either look like this or look like this. Depends on whether you desire a floating cash inflow or a fixed cash inflow. Okay, so that would be the numerical illustration of this genetic fix for floating swap. Okay, and the spread of that 0.1%, the difference between 8.5% and 8.6% become the revenue to the swap bank, because swap bank provides this service to make a market, to trade with you. Depends on whether you desire a fixed payment or you desire a variable payment. Okay, let me explain to you one real life example why you may want to engage with this type of the swap dealing. Okay, let's assume that for this kind of numerical example, let's assume that you are running an endowment fund for a university, like at UVM we have a small amount of endowment fund. And let's assume that we use an endowment fund to pay for, let's say Kevin Chen's salary. Okay, and my salary is relatively fixed. So the university wanted to have this kind of fixed cash inflow to pay for the fixed expenditure, like the salary payment to Kevin Chen. And maybe the university, that you will be running an endowment fund, that you have some investment in some sort of variable rate fixed income security. Maybe the endowment fund investing in some for example, LIBOR related kind of variable short-term fixed income. So through this swap engagement, that you will be able to lock in for the next 5 years. Whenever you have this kind of variable income, you can always convert that into a fixed payment to pay for a relatively constant liability, like the salary to Kevin Chen. Okay, so that eliminated this kind of uncertainty. Okay, so that would be one way to deal with the business risk. Okay, and that's the reason why a lot of a lot of corporations utilizing this kind of instrument. And the size, the notional principal market size, that would be this one. Okay, $100 million. We use this one. Okay, we're talking about this kind, something like this kind of interest rate swap. We have a total $400 trillion kind of instrument currently floating out there. Okay, next slide. And let's look at another numerical example about the interest rate swap. Here, we have three entities. We have a highly rated bank. You can think of Citi, okay, Citi. And then we have a company, okay, and this company may be engaged in industrial production. That's a Boeing, okay. So we have Citi, we have Boeing, and that's called Citi Bank A. That's called Boeing Company B. And then we have a swap bank. Swap bank, let's say that Morgan Stanley. Okay, Morgan Stanley is making market for this type of the bank. So let's consider a AAA rated bank A. Let's assume that's a Citi, that needs $10 million to finance a floating rate loan to its clients. So Citi has a lot of customers. One of the customers want to borrow $10 million for company expansion, and this loan to this particular customer, the interest rate is going to charge a floating rate interest rate. And from Citi perspective, from this AAA rated bank A's perspective, when you make out a loan, you have an asset. This asset has a variable rate, and you need to fund it with some sort of debt liability. And we have this notion in corporate finance. We call that the interest rate risk management. When you have asset that is a variable rate, your liability to fund for that, you want to have a variable rate. So they tie together. So when one is up, the other one is up, the other one is down, the other one is down. So the bank will be able to make that constant margin between these two different rates. So the borrowing rate and then the rate that you borrow, the rate that you lend, and then as long as they remain fixed, then it really doesn't matter that how variable, how uncertain those interest rate is. You always earn that kind of fixed margin. From a bank's perspective, that's the kind of thing you want to do. So the ideal financing from bank A perspective, from Citi perspective, is to issue a 5 years floating rate notes, FRN, indexed to LIBOR. Okay, so you borrow at the LIBOR, you lend this pot of money to one of your customers in the amount of $10 million to earn a relatively stable margin. So that would be the ideal financing, ideal way to get money for this particular lending business. Alternatively, that means that there is a less than ideal way to do the financing, okay, is for the bank A, for the city, to issue a 5 years fixed rate bond at 10%. So it really doesn't matter whether you issue a 5 years floating rate note or a 5 years fixed rate bond. You'll be able to get this pot of money, $10 million, and then you lend it out. But the difference is that the amount of interest payment that you need to pay in the next 5 years will be different. The one is floating while one is fixed. The fixed one will be 10% interest rate. The floating one will be LIBOR, okay? Will be based on LIBOR. And remember the example, that the apple and banana example. So here, for the bank A, is that the bank A, you think of, wanted to have banana, okay? The banana would be the 5 year floating rate note. But the swap bank said that, I know that you want to have banana, but you are not good at growing banana, you are good at growing apple. So the swap bank instruct the bank A to do the alternative financing, to issue fixed rate bond at 10%. Okay, you are at issuing this kind of fixed rate bond, and the reason being that here we're talking about the credit rating of AAA. When you are a AAA company, you have tremendous amount of competitive advantage to issue a fixed rate debt. You will be able to get the interest rate at a far lower level than anyone else, because you have a really high credit rating. Okay, so here, this is the situation for the city. Next slide. Let's assume that the Boeing, the company BBB, okay, company B is a BBB rated firm, and this firm would need $10 million to finance a new investment project with a life of 5 years. Okay, so here we're talking about that you need to borrow money, you will need to set up a production, sell product and services. In return, that the cash flow that you obtain from your operation, you pay for the loan and the financing that you secured today. Ideally speaking, when you have this kind of fixed asset investment, we have this so-called maturity matching principle in corporate finance. Then in general, the firm would prefer a fixed rate, okay, financing. Okay, so you know exactly what amount of interest payment you need to pay every 6 months. Okay, that gives you the certainty to run the business. But because it's a BBB, rated BBB, so when they borrow at a fixed rate, in general, the interest rate would be higher than otherwise would be. Okay, so the alternative financing would become more attractive from the lower borrowing cost perspective. Let's assume that alternatively, company B would be able to issue 5 years floating rate notes at LIBOR plus 0.5%. And here we're talking about there's additional 0.5% interest rate, relatively higher interest rate for compensating the credit risk of a company being rated at the BBB. And so the swap bank said that I know that you want to have the 5 years fixed rate bond and you want to pay for that 11.25%. But if you listen to me, you do the alternative financing to issue floating rate note at LIBOR plus 0.5%, you will be better off. Okay, so the swap bank instruct company B to do the alternative financing, issuing floating rate note at the LIBOR plus 0.5%. Let's see what would happen. And let's jump to slide number 38 to summarize the situation we have here. Okay, and with the title of this slide, say to sum up. Okay, so please find the slide with the title to sum up. That will be slide number 38. Let's look at the bank A. Okay, bank A would prefer to issue LIBOR Okay, that would be on the third row. I coded with the red light, red color. So the red color LIBOR refer to the ideal financing. But the swap bank said that don't do the ideal financing, do the alternative financing. Okay, that would be issuing fixed rate loan, and the cost would be 10% interest rate for the bank A rated the triple A. And for company B, okay, company B, the ideal financing, their preferred financing would be to issue fixed rate cost. That would be the second row for the under the title of company B. As you can see that they will need, initially they will need to pay 11.25% fixed rate. But the bank said that, oh, you should not do this because you do not have a competitive advantage. Instead, you would be better off if you do floating rate financing, and the cost would be LIBOR plus 0.5%. And you will notice that 10% and for bank A and LIBOR plus 0.5% for company B. I use a black color arrow sign there, and that arrow sign indicating actual cash flow. Okay, so those are the actual cash flow that the interest payment they will need to pay when they engage those alternative financing. Once the bank A and company B follow swap bank's instruction to do the alternative financing, now simultaneously the both sides lock into a swap contract in which the swap bank, okay, play as a broker in between, and that would be on the fourth row. If you look at the swap, in this swap deal that bank A would need to pay LIBOR to the swap bank, and in return the bank A would be able to receive 10.375% from the swap bank. And the swap bank say that to the company B, I will pay you a LIBOR. In return, you will need to pay me 10.5%. Okay, so we have simultaneously we have this particular swap contract. So company A, we need to pay 10% because they issue fixed rate bond, fixed rate note, and then simultaneously they pay LIBOR, receive 10.375 from swap bank, and company B will need to pay LIBOR plus 0.5% because they issue floating rate note, and also receive LIBOR from the swap bank, and the company B pay 10.5% to swap bank. Now let's sum up those cash flow. For company A, pay 10%, receive 10.375%. So you have a net cash inflow of 0.375%, and you pay out LIBOR. So in terms of net cash outflow, you have LIBOR minus 0.375%. So for the net cash flow for bank A is LIBOR minus 0.375%. Let's compare this one with the ideal financing without engaging in the swap. That would be LIBOR, right? So LIBOR minus 0.375% is lower than LIBOR by 0.375%. And that's a saving. Okay, through the use of a swap, the financing cost for bank A is LIBOR minus 0.375%, which is lower than otherwise would be without engaging in this swap. So bank A is better off. Let's take a look at company B. Company B pay LIBOR plus 0.5%, receive LIBOR, okay, and pay 10.5%. So we're talking about a payment of total of 11%. So LIBOR in, LIBOR out cancel, right? So you have 0.5% out, you have 10.5% out, so you have a total of 11% out. Under the swap arrangement, the company B would have a fixed payment of 11%. And this 11% is lower than the initial ideal financing of 11.25%, lower than that by 0.25%. So that's a saving of 0.25% for company B. So company B is better off. How about swap bank? Let's look at the swap bank. Receive LIBOR from bank A, pay 0.375% to the bank A, pay LIBOR to company B. So LIBOR cancel out. But receive 10.5% from company B. So swap bank receive 10.5% from company B, pay 10.375% to company A. So how much left inside the pocket of swap bank? That would be 0.125%. So that's a revenue. So that's another win. So here we have a win-win-win situation. Bank A save 0.375% because of swap. Company B save 0.25% because of swap contract. Swap bank earn 0.125% because broker this deal. So here we have a win-win-win situation. It's a brilliant idea. Now let's go back to the previous slide, slide number 37. Okay, why we have this kind of win-win-win situation? It turns out that in this situation we have the so-called quality spread differential. In this case, that the quality spread differential exists such that a swap arrangement is possible. The swap arrangement in this situation would be able to add value for all of the entity involving in this particular transaction. And what would be a quality spread differential? QSD. QSD is simply equal to the difference between default risk premium differential on the fixed rate debt and the default risk premium differential on the floating rate debt. Let's look at the first component. Default risk premium differential on the fixed rate debt would be the difference between 11.25% that the company B would need to pay and the 10% that bank A would need to pay. So that's 1.25%. The default risk premium differential on the floating rate debt is LIBOR plus 0.5%. That is the company B will need to pay, minus the LIBOR, that would be the bank A will need to pay. So here we're talking about 0.5%. And 1.25% is higher than 0.5% by 0.75%. And that 0.75% is a so-called quality spread differential. Whenever we have a positive quality spread differential, then there is a possibility that a swap contract could be structured such that the all entity can benefit from this particular swap arrangement. In this case, that on the third bullet point, that 0.75% quality spread differential is shared by the swap bank 0.125%, bank A 0.375%, and company B 0.25%. Those add up to be 0.75%. So this is the source of the value added for the creation of a swap. And there are a few slides I jumped that summarize what I just told you. You can go back and read those slides, then you will be able to see that. Now let's go to slide number 39. I want to talk about a different type of swap. That is the currency swap. So we just talked about interest rate swap. Now we want to move on to the second category of swap. That would be the currency swap. Currency swap involving cash flow exchange in different denominated in different national currency. That's why we refer to currency swap. That's working on a numerical example. Okay, let's assume that we have a U.S. company has an operation in Germany, and let's assume that they want to set up a production site in Germany, and this production site requires 40 million euro. Okay, initial capital outlay. And this operation, let's assume that has a life of 5 years, and let's assume that the current spot rate is 1.3. And when you have investment in Germany, and most likely that you sell their product and service in Eurozone, and so your cost would be in euro, your revenue and cash flow would be in euro as well. Okay, so most likely you want to borrow money in euro to have the currency match to kind of mitigate the foreign exchange rate risk. So that is your ideal financing. Your ideal financing in this particular situation is to issue euro-denominated 5 years fixed rate bond. Let's assume that's 7%. You need to pay 7% of a euro that you borrow each year. And let's assume that this American company, although it's well known in the United States, is less well known in Germany, and therefore when they borrow money in Germany, that they pay a relatively high interest rate compared with those German companies. Let's assume that's the case, and also that's typically the kind of situation you would expect. And the alternative financing that a swap bank would be interested and also would propose is to say that to this American company, say that you know what, I understand that you wanted to do investment in euro. It would be nice that for you to have some euro to borrow some euro to do this investing, but you really do not have competitive advantage to borrow euro debt in Eurozone. And in contrast, I would suggest that you borrow US dollar in the United States because you are much well known and you are going to have competitive advantage to do so. Let's assume that the alternative financing would be to borrow 52 million US dollar, because based on exchange rate of 1.3, 40 million euro would be 52 million US dollar, and issue 5-year fixed rate dollar bond. And let's assume that the current interest rate in the United States for this company is 8%. Okay, so you borrow $52 million and you will need to pay 8% interest rate in US dollar, you know, down the road in the next 5 years. And of course, once you raise this $52 million, you convert into 40 million euro based on the current spot rate of 1.3. Then you can use this 40 million euro to do the construction and the investing for your fixed asset in Germany. Okay, so that would be the alternative financing. For this American company, the swap bank say that, you know, just raise money in the United States and simultaneously engage in a swap contract. And later we will illustrate that how that would look like, how the swap contract would look like. And let's assume that this swap bank would be able to identify a German company has mirror image financing. This German company wanted to set up an operation or a production site in the United States, and this investment will require 52 million US dollar to set up operation in the United States. By the same token, this European company ideally will want to raise US dollar debt, okay, to pay for this US dollar investment. And let's assume that because this German company is not well known in the United States, so when this German company issue 5 years fixed rate bond, they will need to pay 9% interest rate in US dollar. Okay, and alternatively, the swap bank say that, oh, it would not be a good idea for a German company to issue US dollar debt in the United States because this company is now well known. So the swap bank is going to suggest to this German company, say that a better strategy would be for you to raise euro debt in your home country because you are more well known in your home country, and therefore you will be able to borrow at a relatively more attractive interest rate. And then simultaneously you can lock into a currency swap, okay, and such that that you'll be better off as a result. Okay, so the alternative financing, this German company is to raise 40 million euro in its home country, and this 5 years fixed rate euro denominated bond is going to have an interest rate of the 6%. And this 40 million euro money raised in Germany will later convert into 52 million US dollar based on the current spot rate of 1.3. And this 52 million US dollar will be used to fund this American expansion or the fixed asset investing. And now let's go on to jump to slide number 43. Again, the title of this slide is to sum up. Okay, that will be slide number 43. And again, I use the same format for American company. The ideal financing without using a swap is coded color on the second row. That would be that the ideal financing for this American company is to borrow money in Eurozone for the euro denominated bond at the 7%. But the swap bank say that you should not do this. You ought to do something you are good at. You ought to do the first row. That would be the dollar fixed rate bond at 8%. And of course, again, I put a black color coded arrow sign there to indicating that that is the actual cash flow associated with the interest payment later that the company would need to repay. So that would be the so-called alternative financing. Okay, the U.S. company follow swap bank's suggestion to do the alternative financing to issue U.S. dollar denominated bond with the interest rate of 8%. So this U.S. company, okay, in the next 5 years will need to pay 8% of the interest rate in U.S. dollar. And German company, on the other hand, this German company, the ideal financing would be the US dollar fixed rate bond at 9%. That's coded as red color. And the swap bank tell this German company that you should not do this, and your alternative financing ought to issue euro denominated bond at 6%. Okay, so that will be on the second row. And the swap could be structured in this particular fashion, that for U.S. firm, they are going to receive U.S. dollar denominated 8% interest payment from the swap bank, and it's going to pay euro at 6.1% interest payment to the swap bank. And German company, according to this swap contract, is going to pay U.S. dollar interest rate at 8.1% and is going to receive euro interest payment at the 6%. So let's sum up the net cash flow for the U.S. company under this arrangement. Okay, what kind of the total cash flow that the U.S. firm will need to deal with. So that's the three cash flow with the black arrow sign for U.S. company. That would be U.S. dollar 8% cash outflow, U.S. dollar 8% cash inflow. So they can cancel out. So the net cash flow is euro interest payment at 6.1% out. So the net cash flow would be in red color on the fourth row. That would be euro at the 6.1%. So through the swap contract arrangement, U.S. firm would only need to pay 6.1% euro, and compare with its initial cost under the ideal financing without the swap, that would be euro at 7%. Here we're talking about a saving of the euro interest payment of 0.9%. So that's a saving that the U.S. firm would be able to realize. Let's take a look at the German company, focusing on those three actual cash flow with a black arrow sign. And the German company under the alternative financing pay euro 6%. And they receive euro 6% from swap bank, so they cancel out. So the net cash outflow is US dollar payment 8.1%. And that is coded as red color, okay, on the fourth row for a German firm. And let's compare this net cost with the ideal financing of the US dollar 9%. We are talking about another saving of 0.9% in US dollar for German firms. So German firm is better off for this arrangement. Okay, and why US firm and German firm both are the winner in this particular situation? Let's focusing on the first two rows there. Okay, those ideal financing, right? Let's say US firm, euro 7%. German firm, US dollar 9%. Add up 9% and 7%, we're talking about 16%. So let's ignore the currency. Just add those two numbers together. We are talking about 9% plus 7%. That's 16%. That's ideal financing without swap. Then what happened to after the swap is being used? The alternative financing, that would be the first two rows. Let's look at under the US firm. That's a US dollar 8%. And for German firm, that's the second row, that's a euro 6%. We add 8% and 6% together, we are talking about only 14%. So we'll be able to reduce from 16% to 14%. So basically, it's a saving of roughly about 2%, ignoring different currencies, two different currency here. So when we have a saving of roughly about 2%, we can afford to give 0.9% saving to US firm and 0.9% saving to German firm, and still have roughly about 0.2% of the revenue for the swap bank. Right? Let's look at what swap bank will be able to get. Receive US dollar 8.1% from German firm. Pass on 8% in US dollar to US firm. So keep 0.1% in swap bank's pocket. Look at the euro interest payment. Receive euro 6.1% from US firm, but only pass on 6% in euro to German firm. So swap bank keep another 0.1% in its pocket in euro. 0.1% plus 0.1%, so it's roughly about 0.2%. So this is how the value is created through the use of a currency swap in this particular situation. And I skipped another two slides earlier. That will be slide number 41 and 42. Again, my explanation have covered those two slides, and I think you can just go back and read those two slides and it will become clear. And I think slide number 43 and slide number 38 are a nice way to summarize all of those cash flow with the color coded. If you study these two slides, you fully understand, then I think you can get quite a lot. And these two slides, I think are quite useful for you to understand the complexity of the swap. And this is the end of this topic number 5. Next time when we meet, okay, then we are going to move on to topic number 6. See you next time.